You're listening to the Anthology Towns That Were, an episodic narrative podcast. Follow us on YouTube, twitter.com/townsthatwere, soundcloud.com/townsthatwere, and the Anthology Towns That Were on facebook.com. We hope you enjoy.
Malediction, 1822. John Holmes rows out to the island just before the first snowfall of the season. The waters are clear as the icicles drape on his beard. The oars creak and moan as he drives them back through the lake. A thin veil of ice covers the top of Lake Ophelia, but John doesn't feel the chill in the air. He doesn't feel anything. Not anymore. He used to love his trips to the Cove. He would always volunteer to gather supplies from this place. A half-day's travel, he would gather all he could and travel home. But he usually would spend more of his time sitting in the silence of the island. Peaceful. That's what he thinks of it, as if Lake Ophelia absorbs all of his troubles, cleansing him of his sins and returning him refreshed and pure. But how much can be washed away before blood is drawn? After a few trips to the Cove, John started to feel as if he was losing something. It wasn't the time spent away, it was something else, something deeper. He had started to request the voyage less and less. That place is strange. That's what they always said. Everyone in town sensed something that John could not. Something off about the island. He assumes everyone in town felt uneasy about the silence, that they never stayed still or quiet long enough to appreciate the peace and silence. But still, he feels something being lifted from him. Trip after trip, he feels like Ophelia taking more than he has to give. Recently, he started to understand what everyone in town had already understood. He was not being washed clean. He was being washed away. Even now, he feels himself fading. Each ripple in the lake carries away with it a part of him. Further and further away it drifts until he can feel it no longer. He stops rowing, the lake growing still and serene. Behind him, he hears the break of the water, the splash of a fish. He hears a soft breeze shift the frost on the waters. Before him, he hears nothing. Peaceful, he reminds himself. He tries to convince himself, but there was no peace to be had. He lets his small boat bob up and down in the water for a few moments. From this spot, near the middle of the lake, he sees the island in front of him, pious in its ideology of peace, and behind him, Malediction. He turns himself around to face her. His home appears so small. How helpless, he thinks aloud. How vulnerable. The words are crisp in the air, stinging his dry lips. He's never thought this before. The words feel strange in his mind, like Lake Ophelia was replacing small fragments of him with something else. This was not the first time these intrusive thoughts crept from his lips. He had been having strange thoughts lately. John Holmes is a proud man, a father, a husband. It's this pride that turns him back towards the island. He provides for this town. He would give his life for it. He reminds himself of that as he rows up to the shore, the cove widening as he enters. As the boat comes to a halt upon the shore, he feels the sickening feeling of emptiness clawing its way through his body, pulling at his heart. He feels a weight upon his shoulders. For everything Lake Ophelia takes, the island gives back. In this weight, he turns to the thoughts of his son, and the heaviness lessens, the weight more manageable. He gathers his bag from the boat. Inside, he sifts through twine for firewood, several small leather pouches meant to hold different plants and herbs. He removes a large knife, the sides dented from hastened craftsmanship. The handle a crude leather wrapped around the sharpened stone. The blade itself has never dulled, for no other reason than that John has never used it. Bill Ingrid questioned the need for such a knife, its sloppiness, but John insisted. That rifle of yours will do plenty, Bill told him again and again. A knife like that's only good for skinning. And John brought his rifle. He'd always had it in hand. He's unsure as to where the idea to have the knife made had come from. He had plenty of them on the homestead, but his son was quite the forger. They had all but dedicated a small corner of the house to little Jack's crafting. A smile curls on John's face, picturing his son huddled over a pile of rocks and scrap wood, hammering and chiseling away, though his smile fades as quickly as it appeared, his eyes wandering to the mangled thing in his hand. There's a reason he wouldn't take one of his son's knives, why he had this one made, why he had it now. He swings the rifle over his shoulder, his bag held firmly with the knife in his hand. He leaves the boat on the water. Nothing stirs here. The boat will stay. He used to crave this, the silence, this place. Even the animals were unexcitable, never hearing the cry of a bird or the shuffle of a mouse. This land gives him what is needed, all its berries, mushrooms, golden seal, and fern that he can carry, but never meat. Not that he'd ever been much of a hunter. His father had taught him to track, taught him to aim, though his heart had never liked seeing it through. John fed his family, but never reveled in the hunt. He walks a few feet into the dense woods, silently, as if the leaves and sticks beneath his boots make no sound, cracking beneath his weight. As he reaches a clearing, he digs into his bag, removing a small leather pouch. He sets his belongings down against a barren tree, admiring the plentiful mushrooms surrounding its blackened trunk, the same tree that always protects his belongings. In the collection of red spruce, pine, and white ash trees, this is the only one that's black. It's dead. John assumes the tree had been burned. It's coloring something he had never seen before, and it gives him pause. He quickly turns away from it, not lingering at the tree too long. He never has. He was always worried the sight of it, and the unquestionable nature of its being, would draw him from his peace. But his peace is gone now, and the habit remains. He circles around the clearing in search of firewood and other useful herbs. He hears a crack, loud and thunderous, followed by a low, rhythmic thumping in his ears. He turns slowly on his heels, reaching for his disfigured knife, but he sees nothing. He draws an uneasy breath, realizing he had been holding it. He looks around carefully, as his father had taught him, staying low to the ground. John had never seen an animal bigger than a mouse here before, but he doesn't know this place. Everything has remained the same, but he feels different. The crack sounds again, hearty and full. The blackened tree sways in the wind like a body in the gallows. It moves so unnaturally it almost appears to be human. He wastes no time with queries. John rushes to the tree and stands before its mass. Looking up at its broken branches and decaying bark, he can feel it heaving in the earth beneath his feet. He draws his knife once more and drives it into the wood. All at once, the swaying stops. Not a sound in the air, not a breeze, not a breath. John rests his forehead on the butt of his knife as it sticks from the tree. He feels he might have lost his mind this time. Lake Ophelia took too much. A cool presence falls upon his neck and hands and trickles down his forehead. The first snow, he thinks aloud as he raises his head toward the sky. But there is no snow. There's nothing. There's always nothing. James Grayson peers into the open library of the mansion. The spacious room would make a great study, something he was never able to have back in his cramped apartment. Granted, he took the time to contribute some proper cleaning. Taking a step into the room, images of the intruders with their void-like eyes flash through his mind. His throat swells, and he closes his eyes, inhaling deeply. Cleaning could wait for another time. He passes his packed bags in the foyer, few as they are, and opens the large swinging door to the kitchen, creaking back into place behind him, as most of the other doors in the mansion did. He shouldn't have been surprised, knowing his lack of care for the house in the short time he'd been in Malediction. The unfolding events that seemed to steal him from the house day in and day out. It seemed an easy task, even on his drive to Malediction. In and out, he had told himself. Being back in this curious town, however, James begins to understand that the wrong types may have their eyes on the Grayson estate. He pushes around some of the dishes piling in the sink, knowing that tossing them may prove easier than cleaning them, before he slouches into the feeble wooden chair at the kitchen table. You need to give yourself time to adjust, he reminds himself. He'd been in such a state to get in and out of Malediction as quickly as possible, that James hadn't mentally prepared himself for the task at hand, knowing now that Malediction wasn't going to release its hold on him as easily as he'd hoped. He spends the majority of his morning, well into the afternoon, cleaning the mess that unfolded in their encounter within the boathouse. A few old barrels of oil had toppled, leaking onto the floorboards, covering them with the slippery black liquid, which cleaning proved to be a frustrating job in itself. He sits beside the toppled shelves that nearly pinned Rayla down for the hungering Solus, rummaging through the remains scattered amongst the boathouse. Rusty tools, old spark plugs, nothing out of the ordinary. If something other than the book had been hidden in the small shack, he'd surely have found it by now. He spends a good while sitting on the deck of the boathouse, letting his feet soak in the cold waters of Lake Ophelia, Virgil's hull bobbing at his side. He can't imagine the last time the boat had run free amongst the waves. As they always have, the keys to the boat hang in the foyer, the hanger loose in the wall beside the front door. James digs for his jacket in the back seat of his SUV, hearing the sound of crunching gravel. Just in time, he thinks, seeing Rayla's cruiser amble down the drive. He slips into his jacket, halting the attack of the cool winds. Rayla hops out of her cruiser, hands raised, seeing the heavy concern wash over James's face, explaining fiercely that she's off duty. though, as her flannel flaps open with the breeze, her holstered sidearm speaks otherwise. "Wanted to make sure you didn't skip town on me," she says. "Already tried that once," James mumbles, knowing something waits, unfinished, and there will be no prying himself free until Malediction chews him up and spits him out. He wonders if he'll end up like his father, or his mother, or Gloria. He wonders if it matters how he ends up. From the past few days, he's come to believe his path has been laid out by the town that hovers over him like a suffocating smog. James holds out the keys to Virgil. "Since you're off duty," he says. Lake Ophelia was the smoothest James had seen since his arrival in Malediction. He grew up on these waters, but it had been years since he was last on a boat. Rayla points out his pale complexion amidst the swaying of the boat as they float on the waters. After a few poor jokes, she takes the wheel, allowing him a chance to sit back and reacclimate to life on the water. Around the sharp cape, Dead Man's Cove sits isolated towards the center of the grand waters, bordered by jagged boulders and warped trees. Even as a child, James had never been to the desolate island. In fact, many of the stories that lingered throughout Malediction over the decades tended to scare off even the most rebellious of teens. Gloria Grayson had played her part in steering him away from the cove, seated where Rayla sits now, sharing stories of spirits and villains hiding in the shadows of the rocks. He and Rayla spent hours in the mansion's library, fabricating their own stories of terror and mischief, though none of them had terrified them the way Gloria's had. "Just because you left Malediction doesn't mean you aren't allowed to miss her," Rayla tells him, as if she peers inside his head, dissecting his thoughts. The white-tipped crests of the small waves crash against the side of the boat. James knows she's right, but it doesn't alter his feelings, the guilt, the regret. His father never left, and now that James has seen the true color of Malediction, the town cocooned by mountains and forests, he wonders if this is where he'll be laid to rest as well. Stomach settled, James pulls back the throttle, Virgil's engine humming to life, the air cutting through his jacket and chilling his bones. He rounds the tip of the cape, unaware of Rayla's encounter with the Solace the night he'd found her in the darkness of the mansion. His hand drops lower, and with it, the nose of the boat lifts higher, gaining speed. The wheel cuts smoothly, bringing the starboard side parallel with Dead Man's Cove. From this distance, the trees reveal their graying bark, an unnatural color, as if their trunks, and the trunks alone, have been cast in monochrome. The surrounding boulders jut from the waters like threatening icebergs, revealing the small opening, guiding the waters of Lake Ophelia into the mass of land, isolated from the rest of Malediction. The trees obscuring the interior act as a veil, sheltering its secrets from the outside world. Being close as they are, however, he sees through its masquerade, sees the formations of rocks creating entrances to places unexplored for so many years, the formations that are unaltered by the events unfolding within Malediction. "We should check it out," he finally says, unable to hold back his curiosity any further. Rayla's objection seems theatrical, but he holds in his laughter, noting the honest terror in her eyes. After everything Gloria ever told us, he reminds himself, yeah, I still want to go. He doesn't dare tell her. Rayla doesn't need to convince him, nor should she have to. As James studies the cove one final time, he knows what lays within. An unbridled peacefulness that would cure the afflicted lands of Malediction If only the small cove could absorb the mountainous lands and cough them back up. He feels it deep within his bones, buried somewhere beneath the wind's frost. Something draws him, urges him to follow the slowly churning waters through the boulders and trees lining the cove's entrance. James's arms hang over the edge of the boat, feeling the brisk water splash against his hands as they drift closer to the cove. What could she do to stop us? He wonders, floating ever closer. John Grayson Holmes stands beneath the dead tree, the knife clenched tightly in his hand, head toward the sky. Dead, he whispers the word knowingly. This place is not peaceful. It's a fool's gold, a worthless mockery. It's a dying place, and John has been feeding it. The black tree shudders in acknowledgement. Its quiver sends a dusting of bark into the air. The ash drapes itself on John's arms, frosting his jacket. He doesn't dare look down, keeping his eyes fixed on the sky, the only thing in this place that's held onto itself. He closes his eyes, tears stinging his cheeks. He thinks of his son. He thinks of his wife, his town, his land. He'd made the move to Malediction. Now, he feels he will be its downfall. Insanity. He doesn't recognize his own voice, brings his hands to his mouth, clawing at his lips. Had the words come from him? He forces himself to look at the tree. Death is here. This is its home. Of that, John is sure. Malediction had its share of characters. His father had turned no one away in the beginning. The land he claimed as his own had been a land of treason and mystery in the past. Things had happened there, things John never understood as a boy. His father taught him many things: to hunt, to aim, to fight. And he taught John that evil is a sickness, and some sicknesses can't be cured. He heeded these cautions well. His father looked over Malediction from the beginning, and John continued his legacy. Now, he's failing. This place is using him, but he will not be a catalyst for such a sickness. John closes his eyes once more, removing his knife from the tree. He pictures his father as the blade slides free. He pictures his wife and son home by the fire awaiting his return, and he plunges the dagger between his ribs, angled toward his heart, as his father taught him. He feels no pain. He feels nothing at all. A moment passes, and John is falling. He smiles at this, knowing this wicked place can take no more from him. Another moment passes, and John opens his eyes. Though there is no wind, the black tree before him vibrates. He looks to his hands, and the dagger is no longer there. He rips at his clothing, peeling off his jacket and lifting his shirt, not a mark on him. He stumbles back, seeing the knife reaffixed in its place within the blackened tree, the reverberating, dead tree. He covers his mouth, afraid of the scream that rises within, his hand shaking in rhythm with the monstrosity in front of him. The dust from the tree shakes loose, finally free, traveling through the air like fireflies, cleansing everything it touches of life. John studies the woods surrounding him, large boulders creating cavernous entrances throughout the island. He watches as each tree, plant, and flower are extinguished of life. Everything he sees blackens. Peaceful ending. These are not his words, but it is his tongue that gives them life. He turns again to the tree, barren, naked in the light of the winter's day. The dagger is deep within the tree, leaving hairline fractures through the wood, nearly shattering the trunk. He reaches for it once more, being spared his first attempt to end this madness, but he will not be robbed again. As his fingers curl around the leather straps constricting the handle, the vibrations cease. The tree becomes iridescent, no longer the black void John has come to know. He sees through it, a pool of crystal-like matter forming around the knife, and in this pool, he sees Malediction. He sees his son, collecting stones and branches from their paths throughout the woodlands. He sees his wife talking with their neighbor, and John yearns for home. He releases his grasp, stepping towards his house. He crouches, placing both hands on the sides of the spherical entrance. He takes another step, closer to where he longs to be, before he collapses. A warmth spreads over his body. John grips his stomach, finding it coated red. He looks back to the tree, opaque and black. He sees the knife, still affixed within the tree, dripping from its bite. Then, there's nothing. There's always nothing.
The anthology, Towns That Were, is written by Michael and Jackie Gormley, narrated by Michael Gormley. Music and sound from David Hyde, Free to Use Sounds, The Dark Piano, Purple Planet Music, and Our Music Box.